like, share, and subscribe. Wishing you happiness and good luck every day.
All right, let's get into it. When we look at society's biggest problems, things like education, jobs, immigration, we usually hear from politicians, right? But what if we looked at them like an investor would? That is exactly the angle Joel Greenblatt takes in his book, Common Sense. And honestly, it's a total game changer. He's looking for the best possible return on investment for all of us, and what he finds is pretty incredible. So to get us in the right frame of mind, Greenblatt kicks things off with this amazing quote from Thomas Paine. See, Paine wrote his own Common Sense way back in 1776 to challenge an idea that everyone just accepted as totally normal, being ruled by a king. His whole point was, hey, just because we've always done it this way doesn't mean it's right, or that it even makes any sense. It's a really powerful way to start, and it's the bedrock for what we're talking about today. What are the things we just accept as normal that really aren't? That's pretty much what Paine asked. He said, so, this whole king thing, who picked him? Why are we letting a decision made by a bunch of people hundreds of years ago dictate our lives today? It was such a simple question, but it was one nobody was really asking out loud. And that's the question for us, isn't it? What are our modern kings? The systems we just accept without a second thought, even when they're obviously failing. And the person guiding us on this is Joel Greenblatt. Now, he's not a politician. He's not some academic in an ivory tower. His day job is running an investment fund. He calls himself just a guy sitting in a cheap seats. His whole skill set is looking at a business and figuring out if its model is smart or if it's completely broken. And that's the lens we're going to use to look at some of society's biggest and most broken models. So, here's the game plan. We're going to apply this common sense investor-style thinking to 3 huge areas. First up, we'll tackle the massive design flaws in our education system. Then, we'll look at how we support our workers when the economy gets turned upside down. And finally, we'll talk about how we are just completely bungling the incredible asset that is immigration. Okay, let's start with education. The fundamental problem, the way Greenblatt sees it, is that our system is almost perfectly engineered to create inequality. For most families, it's simple. Where you live determines where your kids go to school. Your zip code basically writes their destiny before they even learn to read. And this slide just lays out the trap perfectly. If you've got money, you've got options. You can buy a house in a great school district, or you can write a check for private school. You get to choose. But if you're a low-income family, you're stuck. You go to the school you're zoned for, which is often the one with the fewest resources. And here's the really cruel twist. Even if we manage to improve one of those schools, property values go up, and the very families it was meant to help get priced out of the neighborhood. We've thrown billions, literally billions, at programs to fix this, and the official reports come back saying they had no effect. It's just a broken model. And this is the result. This is the bottom line number from that broken model, a 95% failure rate. Just let that sink in. If you were an investor and I walked in and told you my business plan had a 95% chance of complete failure, you'd throw me out of your office. And yet this is the system we accept for millions of kids. The odds are they're completely unacceptable. So, what do you do? What do you do when the game is just rigged against you? Greenblatt asks this brilliant question. Imagine you had to beat Tiger Woods at golf back when he was at the absolute peak of his powers. How would you do it? It sounds impossible, right? But the answer is actually really simple. You don't play him in golf. You challenge him to a game of basketball. You change the game entirely. And that right there, that is the core of his solution. He calls it the Roundabout Strategy. Instead of wasting more money on a head-on assault against a system that just won't budge, you find a different way around. You create a whole new path to get to the same destination, a great career that just bypasses the broken old system. This slide really shows you what we're talking about. Over on the left, you got the path we all know, right? It's super expensive, it's risky, and a huge part of your success depends on where you started. But on the right, that's the roundabout path, a system he calls alternative certification. The idea is to stop making a 4-year degree the only key to the kingdom. Instead of relying on a diploma to guess if someone has talent, what if we just focused on, proving they have the skills? So how would this actually work in the real world? Well, it all starts with the employers. Imagine if Google or JP Morgan came out and said, look, for this job that pays $100,000 a year, we don't care if you have a college degree. We just care if you can pass these 3 specific tests that prove you have the skills. All of a sudden, you have a clear target, a real prize. And as soon as that prize exists, a whole ecosystem of low-cost training programs and tutors will pop up to help people get there. It's totally driven by the market, it's based on merit, and it completely sidesteps the old gatekeepers. Okay, so that's a great long-term solution for the next generation coming up. But what about the millions of workers right now? People in their 30s, 40s, 50s who are getting hammered by automation and globalization. These are people with mortgages and kids. They can't just hit pause on their lives and go back to college for 4 years. Now, the solution we always hear from politicians is, let's raise the minimum wage. But if you're thinking like an investor, you see a potential problem. Let's say the market values a person's output at about $9 an hour. If you pass a law forcing their employer to pay $15, well, that employer now has a huge incentive to replace that person with a machine or just figure out how to get by without them. It can actually backfire and hurt the very people you're trying to help. So Greenblatt points to a tool we actually already have, and it's one that pretty much everyone, Democrats and Republicans, seems to like. It's called the Earned Income Tax Credit, or EITC. The simplest way to think about it is as a reverse income tax. If you're working but not making a lot of money, instead of you paying taxes to the government sends you a check to boost your income. The most important part, it rewards work. You have to have a job to get it. But to really see the power of this thing, we have to totally shift our perspective. This quote here is everything. An accountant looks at a dollar spent on the EITC and says, okay, that's $1 of government spending this year. But an investor asks a completely different question. What's the long-term return I'm going to get on this dollar? This table just nails the difference. The accountant sees a short-term cost, a line item on a budget, a deficit. But the investor sees an investment that's going to pay dividends for years, not just because it helps grow the economy, but because it attacks the root cause of some of our society's most expensive problems. And this is the hidden number that changes the entire calculation. $1 trillion. That is the estimated price tag our country is already paying every single year because of childhood poverty. We pay for it in lost productivity, in higher healthcare costs, in crime. It is a massive, constant drag on our society. This isn't some future problem. This is the bill that's already on our credit card, right now. So, here's the investment thesis. Greenblatt says, let's get serious and triple the EITC. Now, the sticker price sounds like a lot, maybe an extra $200 billion a year. But when you look at it like an investor and you start subtracting the savings from that $1 trillion poverty bill, the net cost of the whole thing actually gets pretty close to zero. It's an investment that could literally pay for itself. All right, let's pivot to our final topic, and it's a big one, immigration. The way we talk about this in politics is always as a problem we have to solve. But an investor looks at the situation and sees something completely different. They see a massively valuable asset that we are just throwing away. Let's just start with the bottom line. This number comes from the National Academy of Sciences. A single, highly educated immigrant will contribute, on average, a net positive of $1 million to the U.S. government over their lifetime. And that's after you subtract the cost of every government service they and their kids will ever use. We are literally turning away million-dollar bonuses for the country. It's wild. But what about that argument you always hear, that immigrants take American jobs? Well, the data shows the exact opposite is true. For every 100 skilled immigrants working in fields like science and technology, another 183 jobs are created for native-born workers. Why? Because they start companies, they help existing companies grow, they create new demand. They don't just take a slice of the pie, they make the entire pie bigger for everyone. So Greenblatt's solution here is, once again, just shockingly simple and based on the market. Forget the quotas, the caps, all the crazy bureaucracy, just say this. Any company in the U.S. can hire any foreign worker they want, but there are 2 simple rules. 1, they have to pay them a good salary, say at least $60,000, and 2, they have to pay an extra 20% tax on that salary. What does this do? It gives American workers a huge built-in advantage, and that tax money can be used to fund job training for Americans. It just aligns everyone's incentives. It's just common sense. So, as we wrap up here, you can see the thread that connects all these different ideas, right? This isn't about being on the left or the right. It's not about being a Democrat or a Republican. It's about stepping back from all the noise and just asking a simple question. What is the smartest, most efficient, highest return way to solve this problem? It's about focusing on what works, on long-term value, on common sense. And that brings us right back to the beginning, back to Thomas Paine. We've used this investor's lens to question 3 of the biggest kings of our time, our systems for education, for work, and for immigration. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other huge established system that we all just take for granted as the way things are is long overdue for its own common sense questioning? Makes you think, what's next?
Let's talk about something we all kind of take for granted, the American school system. We know some schools are great and, well, some aren't. But have you ever stopped to ask why? Why does it feel like a family's bank account is the biggest factor in a kid's education? It just feels wrong. But for some reason, that's the system we've got. Today, we're going to dig into that. We're going to investigate why our schools are set up this way, and if there's any hope of ever changing it.
You know, way back in 1776, Thomas Paine wrote these words. He was talking about the monarchy, a system people just accepted because, well, that's just how it had always been done. He was trying to get them to wake up and question the very thing they took for granted. So in that same spirit, let's apply his logic to our schools. We're so used to the way things are, we barely ever stop and ask the big question, is the way we've designed this system actually right?
And that really brings us to the heart of our whole investigation today. I want you to really think about this for a second. If we had a blank slate, if we could build a school system from the ground up right now, would it look anything like what we have? A system where the house you can afford to live in basically decides your future? I don't know the answer, but let's follow the clues and see where they lead.
So here's our game plan. First, we're going to question the very design of the system. Then, we'll do what investigators always do, follow the money, see if that's the answer. After that, we'll look into a really controversial alternative and the massive pushback against it. Then, just when we think we've hit a dead end, we'll uncover a piece of evidence that shows what's truly possible. And finally, we'll try to map out a new way forward. All right, first stop, the absolute foundation of the system. And you know, when you start looking at it, you can't help but ask this really uncomfortable question. Was this thing almost designed to be unequal right from the very start?
So here's the core of the problem. It's really an illusion of choice. If you have money, you have actual choices. You can send your kids to a private school, or you can just buy a house in one of those neighborhoods with amazing public schools. But if you can't afford either of those things, you don't get a choice. You're just assigned a school based on your address. And if that school happens to be failing, you're stuck. You're trapped.
But wait, what about those public school choice programs? Aren't they supposed to be the escape hatch? Well, let's look at the actual evidence. Let's take New York City back in 2017. You've got over 1 million students in the entire system. How many of them, out of 1 million, were actually able to use this program to get into a better school? The number is right there, 876. It's not even a drop in the bucket, it's a rounding error. For almost everyone, that escape hatch might as well not exist. Okay, so if the system's design is flawed, what's the first solution everybody jumps to? More money. It's the most obvious lead, right? The idea seems simple enough. Just pour a ton of resources into the struggling schools and they'll get better. But as you're about to see, this money trail, it leads to a very surprising dead end. Let's look at 2 huge pieces of evidence. First, there was a federal program called the School Improvement Grants, or SIG. It spent an absolutely staggering $7 billion trying to turn around the country's worst schools. Then, New York City tried their own version, the Renewal Schools program, and threw an extra $773 million at the problem. I mean, 2 massive investments, same goal. And as you can see from the timeline, both of them ended in total failure.
And listen, this isn't my opinion or some critic's hot take. This quote, this is from the federal government's own final report on their $7 billion program. I mean, read those words. No effect. No significant impacts. It is an absolutely stunning admission of failure. This is such a critical piece of evidence. It basically proves that just throwing cash at a fundamentally broken structure doesn't fix it. It's a dead end.
Okay, so if the old way of doing things is failing, and if more money isn't the magic bullet, our investigation has to turn somewhere else. And that leads us to a new, and let's be honest, a very controversial clue: charter schools. Now, these are public schools, they're free to attend, but they're run independently. And if more kids apply than there are seats, they use a random lottery to decide who gets in.
And the evidence here is just, well, it's stark. Just look at this table. We're comparing the 2019 test scores from Success Academy. That's a big charter school network in New York, with regular district schools that serve the exact same kinds of low-income kids. The results, they aren't just a little different. They are on 2 totally different planets. You've got over 90% of kids passing math and English at Success, while it's less than 40% in the district schools. I mean, come on, that's a clue we absolutely have to take seriously.
And the data, it just gets more and more incredible.
These charter school kids aren't just beating other low-income schools. Get this. They're outperforming students in the wealthiest suburbs in the entire state. Their students with disabilities are doing better than district students without disabilities. I mean, think about that for a second. The racial achievement gap, that problem that has plagued our system for decades, gone, erased. This is some powerful, powerful proof that where you come from does not have to decide where you're going.
So with results like that, you'd think this model would be celebrated, right? That cities would be tripping over themselves to replicate it. Instead, our investigation runs smack into a brick wall. Intense, organized, political opposition. And it just makes you scratch your head and ask, why on earth would a potential solution with this kind of track record face such a fierce pushback?
This is a perfect example of how that opposition works. It's got nothing to do with results for kids, it's all about political games. Check out this crazy catch-22 they created in New York. First, the mayor makes a rule saying new schools with fewer than 250 students can't use public school buildings. Okay. Then a state law gets passed that says any new charter school with more than 250 students is automatically forced to be unionized. See what they did? The result is that new, non-union charters are basically boxed out of opening in public buildings. It's a political trap, plain and simple.
Another big line of attack is always about money. In Massachusetts, opponents spent millions on a campaign saying that charters drained money from the public schools. But then you look at the actual law, the reality of it. The way it works is districts keep getting paid for students for years after they've already left for a charter. And because of this weird setup, Boston's school budget actually went up by over 23%, even as more kids were choosing charters. So the main argument they used was literally the exact opposite of the financial facts.
So just when this whole investigation starts to feel like a simple fight between charters and the traditional school system, we stumble on this clue. And it comes from a place you would never expect. A clue that suggests the real answer isn't about the type of school at all. It's about something much, much deeper.
I want you to meet PS 172. This is not a charter school. It's not a special magnet school for gifted kids. Nope. It is a regular, zoned neighborhood public school in a low-income part of Brooklyn. And somehow, this one little school is performing in the top 1% of all schools in the entire state of New York. This school changes everything about this investigation.
Just look at how unbelievable their success is. The chart shows it all. Across the whole city, only 9% of kids learning English pass the state English exam. At PS 172, it's over 90%. And get this, 99% of their students with disabilities pass the state math test. If these kids, with all these challenges, can achieve at this kind of level, it just forces you to ask a really profound question. What is the true potential of every single child?
So what's the secret sauce? What are they doing? Well, according to the guy who was principal there for 3 decades, Jack Spatola, it's not some fancy new curriculum. It's not a giant pile of extra money. It's this one simple, powerful belief that every single kid, no matter where they come from, can. It's a culture. It's an expectation. That seems to be the key ingredient, the thing that works no matter what you call the school. Okay, so let's recap the evidence. We know the current system is failing millions of kids. We've seen that just dumping money into it doesn't work. And we've seen that even when amazing alternatives pop up, they run into a political fortress. So if the direct path to fixing this thing is blocked, what's the answer? We need to find a different way. We need to find a roundabout path.
And the need to find this new path is beyond urgent. I mean, this slide right here, this visualizes a statistic that is just devastating. For every 11 low-income or minority students who start high school in a big city, only one, just one of them, will ever graduate from college. The system isn't just leaking, it's a busted pipe. 10 out of 11 kids are being lost. We just can't accept that.
And that leads us to a whole new way of thinking, something we'll call the roundabout strategy. It's actually inspired by conifer trees. Think about it. They can't grow in the rich soil where all the big leafy trees are, so they don't even try. They adapt. They learn to thrive on the rocky cliffs where nothing else can survive. In education, that means if we can't just fix the whole broken system all at once, then we have to be creative and build new paths to success that go around the political gridlock. You know, the former Education Secretary Arne Duncan, he put it so bluntly. He said the system runs on lies. He tells the story about a kid named Calvin Williams, a star basketball player, a B honor roll student. The system told him, his parents, his teachers that he was doing great. But what was the reality? As a senior in high school, Calvin was reading at a 3rd grade level. He'd been lied to his entire life. For kids like Calvin, the main road is a complete dead end. They desperately need a roundabout.
And really, that's where this investigation has to end, for now. We have proof. We know that incredible results are possible for every child. We've seen it with our own eyes in schools like Success Academy and in schools like PS 172. But we've also seen that the system itself can be a fortress, totally resistant to change. So that leaves us with one last massive question. If we can't knock down the walls of that fortress today, how do we start building a path around it for every single child who needs one tomorrow?
Let's talk about something we all take for granted, the path to success. You know the drill. Go to school, get that diploma, land a good job. But what if I told you that for millions of people, that path is completely and utterly broken? Today, we're going to dig into a really radical idea that pretty much challenges everything we think we know about education and opportunity. And we're going to ask, is there a better way?
You know, it reminds me of this classic scene from the movie Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. If you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. John Candy is driving, just happy as can be, cruising down the highway. Except he's on the wrong side of the road, heading straight into traffic. Another car swerves, the driver yells, "You're going the wrong way." And Candy, without missing a beat, just kind of smiles and says, "How would they know where we're going?" It's funny, right? But it's also a pretty terrifying metaphor for our education system.
Because right now, we are driving an entire generation down the wrong road. For low-income and minority students in America's biggest cities, this system we've told them to trust has a 95% failure rate. Let that sink in, 95%. That's the percentage of these students who will never get a job that actually requires the college degree we told them was their one and only ticket out. A 95% failure rate. That's not just a problem, that is a total catastrophic collapse. So, how on earth did we get here? And, more importantly, is there another way to go? In this explainer, we're going to walk through it. We'll look at why the current road is a dead end for so many. We'll pull in a fascinating analogy from the tech world. Then we'll introduce a brand new path, tackle the really tough questions it raises, and show you the surprisingly simple first step to get this whole revolution started. Okay, so let's start with the why. Why is this highway to success so fundamentally broken? I mean, let's really take a look at the wreckage here. The numbers are they're staggering. Only about 40% of Americans even finish college in the first place. Okay, now take that group and cut it in half, because that's how many actually get a job that needs their degree. And for students from disadvantaged backgrounds who are already fighting an uphill battle, that funnel narrows to almost nothing. And behind all these statistics, people, millions of them, drowning in a collective $1.5 trillion of debt, many of them with no degree to show for it. This isn't just a balance sheet problem, it's a crisis of broken promises and broken dreams. So you look at that and you think, how could you possibly change a system that big, that entrenched? Well, the answer might actually come from a place you wouldn't expect, the world of business and technology. Yeah, it's a classic story of what the late Harvard professor Clay Christensen famously called the innovator's dilemma. You have a huge, successful company, let's call it Digital Equipment Corporation. They're making these massive, expensive mini computers for their best customers. They're the kings. And then, along comes this little thing, the Apple II. It looks like a toy. It can't do much. So the big guys just ignore it. But while they're focused on making their fancy machine even fancier, that little toy gets better and cheaper until one day it's good enough to completely take over the entire market. And by the time the big guys even notice, it's way, way too late. And this right here, this is the light bulb moment. What if the traditional 4-year college degree is that big, expensive, exclusive mini computer? It works great for a certain kind of customer, but it leaves almost everyone else behind. And what if we could create a cheaper, more accessible, personal computer for education? Something for all the people the current system has completely failed. So what does this new path, this educational, personal computer actually look like? Let's get a glimpse of what could be. It's a pretty simple concept, really. It's called alternative certification. Just imagine a new pathway where, instead of spending a fortune and 4 years of your life on a degree, you could prove what you know and what you can do directly, through a set of really rigorous, targeted programs and tests. This isn't just about a credential. It's about creating a system where anyone, and I mean anyone, regardless of their background, can prove they have the skills for the job. But you're probably asking, why would companies ever go for this? Well, the economist Brian Kaplan has this fascinating argument. He says that about 80% of a degree's value isn't even the stuff you learn. It's what he calls signaling. Basically, that diploma signals to an employer that you're smart enough to get in and persistent enough to finish. It shows you can jump through hoops. So alternative certification is about creating a new, more direct way to send that exact same signal, a signal that's just as powerful but way more accessible. And the motivation for people to want that signal is, well, it's life-changing. Just look at the numbers. A college graduate earns, on average, 73% more than a high school graduate every single week. This isn't just about a bigger paycheck. This is about stability. It's about being able to provide for your family. It's about freedom. That is the prize we're talking about. So here's how this could actually get off the ground. It's pretty cool. Step 1, a few big respected companies, think Google, JP Morgan, companies like that, they establish the prize. They come out and say, for these specific high-paying jobs, we will now accept these certifications instead of a college degree. Boom, that creates demand. All of a sudden, there's a brand new, clear path to a great career. And then you just watch. An entire ecosystem of tutors and online courses and nonprofits will literally spring into existence to help people prepare for and win that prize. Okay, I know what you might be thinking. This all sounds a little too easy, a little too good to be true. And you're right to be skeptical. There are some huge, legitimate questions here. So let's just get into it and tackle the toughest ones head on. All right, first one up, and it's a big one, the GED. I mean, haven't we already tried this with a high school equivalency exam? And didn't that kind of fail to really change people's lives for the better? It's a fair question, but the difference is all about the signal you're sending. For a lot of employers, a GED signals, yeah, I was probably smart enough, but I just didn't have the grit to finish high school. But now, think about someone who's had to fight through poverty and a failing school system their whole life. For that person to pass a series of difficult professional-level exams, that signals the complete opposite. It screams determination. It screams character. And that is exactly what every single employer is desperate to find. Okay, but that brings up the next obvious question. Let's be honest. If these certifications are that difficult, how in the world is someone who went to a terrible school supposed to have any chance of passing them? And the answer comes right back to that prize. There's this incredible story about a company called Celtel that wanted to bring mobile phones to Africa. They went into places with no reliable electricity, no roads, nothing. But because people wanted cell phones so badly, an entire support system, people setting up generators, creating supply chains, building towers, just spontaneously emerged to meet that demand. The demand pulled the solution into existence. It's the same idea here. The prize of a good job is so powerful, it will create the support system needed to help people win it. And finally, we have to talk about the legal elephant in the room. Here in the US, aren't there laws against using hiring tests that might screen out certain groups of people more than others? Isn't that illegal? Well, the short answer is yes, it can be. There's a landmark Supreme Court case called Griggs v. Duke Power that deals with this, but there's a really clever and, frankly, elegant way around it. Here's the key. The companies don't require the tests. They don't administer them. They simply announce that they will consider good scores from third-party certifiers as one positive factor in a holistic review. The choice to take the test and share your score is 100% up to the applicant. It's a simple change, but it makes all the legal difference. So, after all that, how does this revolution actually get started? You might think it takes an act of Congress or some massive undertaking, but the first step is actually remarkably small. And this is maybe the most powerful part of the whole idea. This is not a government program. It doesn't require a single new law to be passed. It doesn't need a single dollar of taxpayer money. This is a revolution that can be started by the private sector today. All it takes is a handful of bold, trend-setting companies to decide they want to find talent in a new way. They create what you could call a new front door. They just publicly list the skills and the specific certifications they'll accept for good jobs. They set the standard. They make the rules, and they commit to hiring from this new talent pool. If they build that path, believe me, the talent will show up. You know, in the end, this is all about questioning a system that we've just accepted as the way things are. It's a lot like when Thomas Paine, back during the American Revolution, asked a really simple but world-changing question. Where did this king guy come from anyway? Why are we just accepting that he gets to rule over us? We can ask the same kind of question today about the college degree. The system we have is clearly unfair and broken for so many. So maybe the only question left is, are we brave enough to build something better? All right, I'm just going to come clean right from the start. I was an accounting major in college. I know, it sounds incredibly boring, but honestly, most of it really just boils down to one simple idea. Revenues minus expenses equals net income. But you gotta stick with me here, because how we choose to look at those numbers, well, it can change absolutely everything. My dad used to say this all the time. It's this little piece of, Brooklyn wisdom that's always just stuck with me, and it is the perfect setup for what we're about to get into. Because today, we're talking about a $1 trillion idea. And believe it or not, it all comes down to how you choose to figure. So let's start with what I like to call the accountant's dilemma. It's this core concept that seems so simple on the surface, but it actually creates this huge fundamental conflict in how businesses and, even governments think about value, about investment, and about the future. Okay, it's a concept called depreciation. So picture this. Your company buys a big, fancy machine for $1 million. You figure it's going to last about 10 years. Now, it wouldn't really make sense to count that whole $1 million cost in the very first year, right? It would make your books look terrible. So what accountants do is they spread that cost out, recording it as a $100,000 expense each year for 10 years. It's a way to match the cost of the thing with the money it helps you make over time. Pretty simple stuff. But lately, things have gotten way more interesting. And yes, I just used interesting and accounting in the same breath. The whole rise of subscription services has really thrown a wrench in this tidy little picture. Let's look at a software company to see exactly what I mean. Okay, so let's do the long-term math here. This company spends $2,000 on ads to get one new customer. That customer pays $1,000 a year for their subscription, and on average, they stick around for 8 years. So you do the math. A $2,000 investment brings in $8,000 in revenue. That's a lifetime profit of $6,000. From a business perspective, that is an amazing deal. You do that all day long, no questions asked. But here's the dilemma. The accountant who's just looking at this year's books sees a totally different story. They see $1,000 of revenue coming in, but $2,000 in ad costs going out. So for this year, that's a loss of $1,000. The business owner knows they just made a brilliant long-term investment, but the official accounting statement, it says they lost money. So which view is the right one? The short-term accounting snapshot or the long-term business reality? There's no easy answer, but whichever way you lean on this question, that's the absolute key to understanding a truly massive, economy-shifting proposal. So just keep that question in the back of your mind as we go. Now let's take that exact same way of thinking and apply it to one of the biggest challenges we're facing today. The two massive forces of technology and globalization. They've displaced countless workers. And while the long-term fix is all about education and retraining, what do we do for the people who need help right now, today? So one of the most popular solutions you hear all the time is just raising the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. That would be a huge leap from the current $7.25. It means a full-time worker would make about $30,000 a year. The goal is simple, it's noble. Make sure that anyone who's willing to put in the work can actually earn a living wage. But the source material points out some potential economic headwinds. What if a worker's output is really valued at, say, $9 an hour, but a business is forced by law to pay them $15? Well, that business has a tough choice to make. It might push them to automate faster, replace people with machines. It could make them lose business to competitors overseas. Or they might just decide not to expand, or maybe not even open a new business in the first place. All of this could potentially lead to fewer jobs overall. So if a big wage mandate has all these potential complications, is there another way? Is there a way to get more money to low-wage workers without those side effects? Well, the good news is, a plan like that, it already exists, and it's been running for decades. It's called the Earned Income Tax Credit, or the EITC. The basic idea is super simple. If you work and your income is below a certain level, the government actually sends you a check. It's basically a reverse income tax. The whole thing is designed specifically to boost the pay of the lowest paid workers and give people a real incentive to get into the workforce. And look, this is not some small, niche program. Back in 2018, the gross cost, what you might call the sticker price, was $68 billion. That makes it the third largest social welfare program in the entire country. And for what it's worth, it's had support from both political parties for a long, long time. But, and this is a huge but, this is where we come right back to our accountant's dilemma. That $68 billion, that's the short-term view. When researchers really dug into the long-term effects, they found something absolutely stunning. the actual net cost to the government is estimated to be closer to just $9 billion. And this chart really shows you why this program is so incredibly efficient. Because the EITC encourages work, more people join the labor force. And as you can see, that leads to more tax revenue for the government. We're talking payroll taxes, sales taxes, and it means less spending on other welfare programs. When you add it all up, for every dollar the government spends, it gets back about 87 cents in return. The real net cost is only 13 cents on the dollar. It's an unbelievably efficient system. So, okay, we've got this super efficient tool that already has widespread support. And that leads to a really fascinating question. What would happen if we took this proven concept and just scaled it up dramatically? Here's the proposal. Expand the EITC to make sure that every single worker in America earns an effective wage of at least $15 an hour. So if your job pays $9 an hour, the government, through the EITC, would kick in the extra $6 to get you to 15. This would create a $15 an hour wage floor without forcing employers to pay more than a worker's skills might currently justify. So what's the cost of a plan this ambitious? Well, the sticker price, the number our short-term focused accountant would jot down, is enormous. It's just under $1 trillion a year. And that's a number that just stops most conversations dead in their tracks. But you know where this is going, right? That $1 trillion figure is only one way of figuring. To really understand the true impact, we have to take off our short-term accountant hat and put on our long-term business hat and look at the whole picture. If we apply the same logic we did to the current EITC, that $1 trillion sticker price is not the real cost, not even close. Once you factor in all the new tax revenues and the massive savings on other government programs, the net cost gets cut almost in half, down to below $600 billion. Still a huge number, for sure, but this is where that long-term view becomes so incredibly powerful. Because we have to compare that cost to an even bigger one that our society is already paying right now, every single year. Researchers have calculated the long-term cost of childhood poverty. They factor in things like increased healthcare needs, higher crime rates, and lower adult earnings down the road. That cost is over $1 trillion a year. We're already spending that money, we just don't see it as one big line item on the federal budget. And this is the final piece of the puzzle. If a program like this could lift millions of people out of poverty and cut those long-term societal costs by just half, saving $500 billion, and then reduce other related spending, the entire program doesn't just pay for itself. It actually generates a surplus. It stops being an expense and starts being a profitable investment for the country. Okay, now, a $1 trillion proposal, no matter how solid the long-term math looks, is an incredibly tough political sell. The source material gets that, and it proposes a more pragmatic, immediate first step that we could actually take right now. The idea is to start with a $200 billion investment to triple the current EITC program. This would get targeted help to the families and individuals who need it the most, raising the effective minimum wage to over $10 an hour. And because of the program's amazing built-in efficiency, the immediate net cost to the government would be less than $50 billion. And when you factor in the long-term savings from reducing childhood poverty, even this more modest plan, it still ultimately pays for itself, becoming a net gain for the country. So what's the big takeaway from all this? We started with a simple accounting problem, and we ended with a potential solution to one of society's biggest challenges. It just goes to show you that sometimes the biggest obstacle isn't the price tag, but just the way we choose to look at the numbers, the short-term cost versus the long-term investment. Maybe the source is right, and all this program really needs is a new name.
What if I told you there's a literal gold mine right under our feet, a source of incredible wealth and opportunity, just sitting there? You'd think we'd be digging like crazy, right? Well, today we're going to talk about an economic gold mine for America that offers just unbelievable benefits. But for some reason, we've decided to just walk right past it.
All right, let's put it this way. What if somebody came up to you and offered you a check for $1 million? And, as a little bonus, a bunch of new jobs would magically open up for people in your town. No catch. Would you take it? Of course you would. Who wouldn't? And yet, believe it or not, as a country, that's pretty much the deal we're saying no thanks to every single day.
You know, to really get how bizarre this whole situation is, we first need to agree on what a really, truly terrible deal looks like. And for that, I gotta take you back, way back to my elementary school days, and an offer that was so bad, it's a miracle anyone ever said yes.
Oh man, you remember these things? This little flimsy pamphlet would show up in your backpack, sent home for your parents to sign, and it sounded all grown up and responsible, right? School insurance, to protect you from accidents. But oh boy, the real story, the actual deal, was buried deep in the fine print.
So to actually collect the quote-unquote jackpot from this insurance, the things that had to happen to you were just awful. We're talking about losing an eye and a foot, or an eye and a hand, in the same accident. I mean, come on. Even as a kid, I was thinking, there's got to be an easier way to make some cash. And get this, the fine print actually said you could only win this prize twice. Like, that was a real concern for anybody.
And for all that potential mayhem, what was the grand prize? $10,000. It is, without a doubt, the definition of a horrible, no good, very bad deal. The cost was catastrophic, and the reward was, well, it was just an insult. So let's just keep that in our heads. The perfect example of a bad deal.
Okay, now let's completely flip that on its head. Let's talk about the polar opposite of that terrible deal. Let's talk about an unbelievably good deal. One that's on the table for America right now, offered by some of the smartest, most driven people in the world who want to come here and work.
This number right here is the heart of it all. $1 million. According to a huge study by the National Academy of Sciences, that's the average net fiscal contribution of just one highly educated immigrant over their lifetime. That's all the taxes they'll pay, minus any government services they'll use. It is, for all intents and purposes, a free $1 million check handed right to us.
But wait, it gets even better. That $1 million is just the start. This isn't just about tax revenue. It's a powerful engine for creating jobs for everybody else. Look at this data. For every 100 skilled foreign workers we bring in, they create, get this, 183 new jobs for American-born workers. And this isn't some academic fantasy. Bill Gates saw it happen in real time at Microsoft. He said for every H-1B engineer they hired, they ended up hiring 4 other people just to support them. These folks aren't job takers, they are job makers.
And the long-term effect? Wow, it's even bigger. Did you know immigrants are twice as likely to start a business as people born here? I mean, look at these companies, Google, Apple, Tesla, all founded by immigrants or the children of immigrants. More than half of all the billion-dollar startups in the U.S. have an immigrant founder. That's not just adding to our economy. In many ways, that is our modern economy.
Okay, so the deal is amazing, right? $1 million a pop, tons of new jobs, world-changing companies. So why in the world are we making it nearly impossible to say yes? The truth is, our system is a total mess. When you rank developed countries on how friendly they are to skilled workers, we're second to last. It's not just broken, it's like we're actively shooting ourselves in the foot.
You want a perfect example of how backwards this is? Just look at how we hand out green cards, the ticket to permanent residency. A measly 7%, 7, go to people based on their skills or their job. The other 93%? Mostly based on family ties. We are literally prioritizing almost everything except the massive economic benefit these people bring.
And what if a company just wants to hire a skilled worker on a temporary visa? Oh, get ready for the H-1B gauntlet. First, they have to wait months for one specific day of the year just to apply. Then, because there are way more applicants than spots, they have to hope they win a literal lottery. If they get lucky, they wait another 3 to 6 months for approval. And after all that time and money, the visa's only temporary and can cost the company over 50 grand. It's insane.
Now, I get what you might be thinking. Okay, but isn't all this red tape there for a reason? To protect American jobs? That's the big fear, right? It's the number one argument you always hear. So let's talk about it. Let's tackle that myth head on.
This really gets to the core of it, doesn't it? This idea that the economy is like a pizza with a fixed number of slices. So if an immigrant gets a slice, that's one less for me. The fear that more workers means lower pay for everybody. But is that actually how the economy works? Let's see what the evidence has to say.
Well, the data is pretty clear. The answer is a big, resounding no. This isn't a zero-sum game at all. It's a positive-sum game. Like we just saw, skilled immigrants don't just take a slice of the pie, they actually make the whole pie bigger for everyone. When you add brilliant, productive people to an economy, guess what? The economy grows, and that creates new opportunities for everybody.
And what about the idea that they lower wages for Americans? That's another myth that just crumbles when you look at it. Companies are required by law to pay H-1B workers the same prevailing wage as their American counterparts. In fact, studies from the Government Accountability Office have found that H-1B workers often earn more. They are not a source of cheap labor, they're a source of a highly specialized, in-demand talent.
All right, so let's recap. The deal is incredible. Our current system is a disaster, and the main fears about it are based on myths. So, what do? Well, the good news is we don't need some 1,000-page complicated bill. There's a remarkably simple, smart, market-based plan that could fix this whole thing.
So here's the proposed plan. You get rid of the whole lottery system, the arbitrary caps, all that chaos. You replace it with one simple rule. If a U.S. employer wants to hire a foreign worker, they can. The only condition is they have to pay an extra 20% tax on that worker's salary. This one change does two brilliant things. It automatically gives American workers a direct 20% cost advantage, and it completely eliminates the bureaucratic nightmare for companies trying to hire the best people.
And the result is a true win-win-win scenario. Companies get the top-tier talent they need to grow and innovate. Skilled immigrants get the opportunity to contribute to our society. And America, we get a massive injection of tax revenue, a ton of new jobs, and sustained economic growth. It's a system where everybody comes out ahead. So let's just zoom out for a second. This isn't just about tweaking a few visa policies. This is about a fundamental choice we have to make about America's future. It's about deciding what kind of country we really want to be in the 21st century.
You know, we always hear about brain drain, where a country's best and brightest leave for better opportunities somewhere else. Well, America has this unique chance to be the world's ultimate brain magnet. A recent Gallup poll found that if they could, 147 million people would choose to immigrate right here. We have the chance to be the #1 destination for global talent, ambition, and drive.
And just think about what that really means for us here at home. That $1 million in net contribution from each skilled immigrant isn't just some abstract number. It's found money. It's a new influx of resources that we could use to solve our own problems, to fund job training for American workers, to better care for refugees, or to tackle childhood poverty. By welcoming the best from around the world, we can be our best right here.
Which brings us right back to where we started. There are two deals on the table. One is that absurd school insurance policy, a terrible, painful, nonsensical deal. The other is a gift, a free $1 million, an explosion of new jobs, and a wave of innovation. The choice seems pretty obvious, doesn't it? It's time we finally started taking the good deal.
All right, let's jump right in. We're going to tackle a really fascinating problem today, one with a surprisingly elegant solution. It's what you might call Wall Street's own prisoner's dilemma. So to really get a handle on this, we've got to go way back. Picture this. It's the 18th century, and Great Britain is shipping convicts all the way to Australia. And these journeys, they were just brutal. I mean, on one of the early voyages, a staggering 40% of the prisoners died. Just think about that. Clearly something had to change. Now, you might think the answer was, more rules, more doctors on board, more inspections, all that stuff. But the actual solution, the effective one, was so much simpler. See, the original deal was that captains got paid a flat fee for every single prisoner who got on the ship in England. The new contract, it changed just one little thing. It said, we'll only pay you for the prisoners who get off the ship in Australia alive. And just like that, bam! The captain's own financial success was completely tied to the prisoner's survival. And guess what? It worked like a charm. Okay, so what does this old story have to do with today? Well, everything. Because that powerful, simple principle, that incentives matter, that's the exact lens we need to use when we look at our modern financial system. We're not going to ship Wall Street to Australia, obviously, but you better believe we can learn a thing or two from those sea captains. So, let's get into the meat of it. The core problem here is something we've all heard of, the too big to fail problem. And it all comes down to a simple but critical fact. Big banks, they just aren't like other businesses. I mean, think about it like this, right? A new restaurant opens up, and a year later it fails. That's tough for the owner, for sure, but it's just the normal churn of capitalism. The rest of the economy barely blinks. But what happens if a giant bank goes under? Well, that's a completely different story. It's like pulling a critical Jenga piece out of the tower. It can trigger this catastrophic domino effect that takes the entire economy down with it. They're just that interconnected. And the thing that gives them all this power and also makes them so fragile is a concept called leverage. It's pretty simple, really.
It just means using a tiny slice of your own money and a whole mountain of borrowed money to run your business. And yeah, this juices up your profits like crazy, but it also magnifies your risk, leaving you with a paper-thin cushion if things go wrong. So just how thin are we talking? Let's take a look at JP Morgan Chase, one of the biggest, supposedly best capitalized banks out there. Back in 2018, a full decade after the financial crisis, their tangible equity, that's basically their own skin in the game, the actual cash they have to cover losses, was only 7% of their total assets. Just 7%. To put that in perspective, that's like buying $1 million house with only an $80,000 down payment. So think about it. If the value of that house drops by just 8%, your entire investment, it's gone. Poof, wiped out. And that's the razor's edge these massive banks are living on, day in and day out. Okay, so after 2008 nearly torched the entire global economy, of course, regulators had to do something. And they did. They came back with this massive, sweeping set of reforms called the Dodd-Frank Act. The whole idea was to build a much stronger safety net. And look, Dodd-Frank did some genuinely important things. It made banks hold more capital, it forced them to get smarter about how they measure risk, and it created this new thing called bail-inable debt. It's a bit technical, but basically it's a special kind of debt that's designed to automatically turn into equity, into ownership, if a bank starts to fail. The whole point was to create a kind of financial shock absorber, so the bank's own investors, not you and me, the taxpayers, would be the ones to take the hit. And listen, the system is absolutely safer than it was before 2008, no question. But is it safe enough? That's the real question, isn't it? Well, a lot of experts are pretty skeptical. Take Neil Kashkari. He was right there inside the Treasury during the 2008 meltdown, and his argument is basically this. When the next big crisis hits, regulators are going to get cold feet. They'll be absolutely terrified to actually pull the trigger on these new tools. Why? Because they'll worry that forcing huge losses on the investors of a giant bank could set off a massive panic and, well, make everything a whole lot worse. And this isn't just a gut feeling. His team at the Minneapolis Fed actually ran the numbers. They calculated the odds of another taxpayer bailout happening in the next 100 years. Before the crisis, it was a crazy 84% chance. After Dodd-Frank, yeah, it's down, but it's still at 67%, a 2 out of 3 chance. I don't know about you, but those odds don't exactly help me sleep at night. And here's the other side of the coin. This huge, complex web of new rules, it's had some serious unintended consequences. The costs to comply with everything have absolutely crushed smaller community banks. You know, the ones that actually give loans to the small businesses on Main Street. The result? New banks aren't being started, and the engines of our economy are finding it way harder to get the credit they need to grow and hire people. So if piling on more and more complex rules just creates new problems without even fully solving the original one, what's the alternative? Well, maybe it's time we stop trying to patch a leaky boat. Maybe it's time we go all the way back to that simple, powerful lesson from the convict ships. Get the incentives right from the start. So you've got to ask, why do banks fight tooth and nail against what seems like the simplest solution? Just holding more of their own money. This rental house analogy explains it perfectly. Okay, let's say you buy $1 million rental property. You put $100,000 down. Your return on equity, your profit compared to your own cash in the deal, is a sweet 14%. Great. But now, imagine the rules change and you have to put down $200,000 instead. The property's the same, the rent you collect is the same, but because you're using less borrowed money, your personal return on equity plunges to just 9%. That's a massive hit. And that right there is why banks are addicted to leverage and why they want to keep that equity cushion as thin as they possibly can. And that brings us to the crucial point. We have a fundamental misalignment of interest here. The exact same thing that juices returns for bank shareholders, that high leverage, is the very thing that jacks up the risk for the rest of us, for society and for taxpayers. The incentives are totally, completely crossed. Okay, so what's the prisoner's solution for Wall Street? It's a pretty straightforward 3-step plan. Step 1, you require the big banks to hold a much, much bigger equity cushion. We're talking 20 to 30%. Step 2, and this part is absolutely key, you make it easy for them. You let them raise this capital using a special new kind of stock. And step 3, you use the tax code to make this new stock incredibly attractive to both the banks and to investors. Now, this is the really clever part. This is how it works. Right now, our tax code basically encourages banks to take on a ton of debt because the interest they pay on that debt is tax deductible. This proposal completely flips that script. First, you make the dividends they pay on this new, safer stock tax-deductible for the bank, just like interest payments are now. And then, this is the kicker, for the people who invest in this stock, you make the dividends they get completely tax-free. All of a sudden, you've used the tax code itself to make a much safer way of funding a bank cheaper and more attractive than the risky way. You've perfectly aligned the incentives. So by doing this, you're not just tacking on another complicated rule. You are fundamentally realigning the entire system of risk and reward. You're building something that's not just fairer, but a whole lot simpler too. And what's the end result? Well, with that huge 20 or 30% equity cushion, if a crisis hits, almost all of the losses get absorbed by the bank's own shareholders, the people who bought the stock. The risk gets shifted away from you, the taxpayer, and put squarely back on the investors, which, let's be honest, is exactly where it should have been all along. And this brings the whole argument full circle, doesn't it? It basically solves the too big to fail problem. It finally puts a bank failure on the exact same level as that restaurant failure we talked about. The owners, the people who took the risk, are the ones who bear the loss, not the public. And the knock-on benefits here would just be enormous. The chances of a taxpayer bailout, they'd plummet. We could get rid of tons of complex, expensive regulations. Those smaller community banks would be free to do what they're supposed to do, lend money to small businesses. And the big one, the incentives for bankers would finally be aligned with the stability of the entire system. Now, look, let's be real. A change this big would face a massive political fight. And economists would argue for years about the exact numbers. But that's not the point. The core principle is what really matters. And that core principle leaves us with a really important question to think about. What if, instead of constantly building these more and more complex walls to protect ourselves from bad outcomes, what if we focused on designing a system where the incentives were just right from the get-go? Just like with those convict ships centuries ago. Maybe a simple, elegant change to the core incentive is actually the most powerful solution we have.
A few years back, I got this interesting request. I was asked to teach an investing class to a bunch of ninth graders. Yeah, ninth graders. I was excited, but honestly, a little terrified. How do you get 14-year-olds to care about long-term financial planning when they're mostly just thinking about what's for lunch? So I decided to start with a puzzle.
I gave them a simple handout with this one question. I said, okay, imagine two people. They're both investing for retirement, they put in the exact same amount of money every year, and they even get the same 10% annual return. The only thing that's different is when they start and when they stop. Let's walk through it.
All right, so here's the setup. You've got investor A. Let's call them the marathon runner. They start at 26, and they are consistent. They put in $2,000 a year for 40 straight years. That's a total investment of $80,000. Then you have investor B, the sprinter. They get a huge head start at age 19, invest that same $2,000 a year, but they only do it for 7 years. That's it. At age 26, they stop. They've only put in a total of $14,000. So, who's got more cash at 65? The person who invested 5 times more money, or the one who got that early start?
Well, investor A, our marathon runner, does great, no doubt about it. After 40 years of saving, they've got almost $900,000. That's a fantastic nest egg. It seems pretty obvious they're the winner, right? They put in all that extra money.
But they're not. Investor B, the sprinter who only saved for 7 years and only put in $14,000 of their own money, they end up with over $930,000. Yeah, more money at retirement, even though they saved for 33 fewer years and invested $66,000 less. And that, right there, is the mind-blowing power of compound interest.
So the lesson is crystal clear. It's not just about how much you save. It's about how much time you give your money to grow. Those first 7 years were more powerful for investor B than the entire 40 years were for investor A. Time is the secret sauce. But here's the tragic irony. For so many people, the clock hasn't even started ticking.
Okay, so let's step away from that perfect classroom example and look at the real world. Because the story of retirement savings in America today as well, it's pretty grim.
This number says just about everything you need to know. For almost half of all working-age families in the United States, their total retirement savings is exactly this. 0. Not a little bit, not less than they'd hoped for, nothing. Zilch. For tens of millions of people, that power of compounding we just talked about, it might as well be a fantasy.
And if you break this down by income, the picture gets even more stark. For families in the top 20% of earners, about 9 out of 10 have some retirement savings. But for those in the bottom 20%, it's less than 1 in 10. So our current system, which mostly relies on voluntary stuff like 401ks, it's not working for a huge chunk of the country. So you have to ask, is there a better way to do this?
Well, maybe there is. It's actually worth looking halfway around the world, to a country that decided to tackle this problem head-on, Australia. And they've had some pretty incredible success, saving the equivalent of almost 30 trillion US dollars.
They have a system called superannuation, or just super for short. The idea behind it is actually really simple, but it's a total game changer. Saving isn't a choice, it's mandatory. But, and this is a big but, the burden isn't on the worker to figure it out. It's on the employer to contribute for them.
So how does this whole super thing work? Well, you can think of it as a two-part safety net. First, you have the private accounts. For every single worker, their boss has to contribute a slice of their salary. Right now, it's 9.5%, and it's going up, into a retirement fund. The employee gets to pick which fund from a list. Then, part two is the government backstop. If, after a lifetime of work, that private account still isn't quite enough, a government age pension kicks in to make sure they have a basic standard of living. It's a really powerful one-two punch.
So this brings us to a really fascinating what-if. What if we took the big ideas from Australia's system and tried to apply them to the biggest retirement program we have here in the States, Social Security?
Okay, so let's break down what this would look like. First, you take the 12.4% Social Security tax that comes out of our paychecks, and instead of sending it to the government, you'd put it directly into a personal investment account for every worker. Second, you'd get rid of the income cap. Right now, you only pay Social Security tax on the first $137,000 or so that you make. This idea says, nope, tax all wages. And third, and this is a really important piece, you take some of that new money from the higher earners, about 15 to 20%, and use it to boost the accounts of people with lower incomes.
Now that sounds pretty compelling, doesn't it? Everybody gets their own investment account right from the start, putting that magic of compounding to work. But, and you knew there was a but coming, there are some huge, and I mean huge, problems with a plan like this. And the biggest one is us.
This quote from the source material just hits you right between the eyes. The whole idea of privatization rests on one giant assumption that if you give regular people a big pot of money, they'll manage it smartly for decades. The evidence, though, suggests that's just a really, really bad bet.
To prove this, the author of our source material ran this awesome experiment. He set up a system to help people invest. Some people managed their own accounts, picking and choosing stocks. Others just clicked a box that said, "You do it for me," and let an automated system take over. The results, as you can see here, were just wow. The people who managed their own accounts, that's the first bar, they actually did worse than just buying a simple market index fund like the S&P 500, which is that middle bar. But the automated, professionally managed accounts, that bar on the right, they crushed it, beating the market by over 20 percentage points in just 2 years.
So what happened? It's just human nature. We get in our own way. The self-managed investors, they avoided the stocks that felt scary or unpopular, which are often the ones that have the biggest payoffs. They panicked and sold everything when the market took a nosedive. And then they only got brave enough to put more money in after everything had already shot back up. This is so common that another study found that investors in a top-performing fund managed to turn what should have been an 18% yearly gain into an 11% yearly loss, just by buying high and selling low over and over.
And look, even if we could magically make everyone a perfect investor, there's a massive practical problem. If we suddenly divert all the money we're paying in Social Security taxes into our own private accounts, who pays today's retirees? Where does that money come from? The government would have to borrow hundreds of billions of dollars every single year to keep its promises, digging a gigantic hole in the budget for decades to come.
Okay, so if completely privatizing Social Security is probably too risky and way too expensive, what's the alternative? Are we just stuck? Well, the source material argues that we shouldn't just toss the whole idea. Instead, we should look for smarter, more practical hybrid solutions that can give us the best of both worlds.
And there are a couple of ways we could go. The first idea is compulsory, and it's built on top of Social Security. You'd keep the current system, but you'd make high earners pay Social Security tax on all their income. That extra money wouldn't go to the government, though. It would go into creating brand new private accounts for everybody, with some of it being used to give lower income folks a head start. The second idea is more voluntary and uses the 401k system we already know. You'd let high earners save a lot more on their 401ks, but you'd take a slice of their extra savings to help fund accounts for others. And to make sure everyone's included, you'd require all businesses to offer a 401k.
But what about that bad investor problem? How do you stop people from making those classic mistakes? You do it by building in some sensible guardrails. You don't give people 1,000 choices. You give them less than 10 good ones, all professionally managed, low cost, and diversified.
And if someone just doesn't choose it all, you automatically put them into a smart, age-appropriate fund. The government's job would just be to vet the fund managers and make sure everything stays transparent and on the level.
So, when you boil it all down, the real goal here isn't to blow up a system like Social Security that so many people rely on. The goal is to build on it. You keep the safety net that we have, but you add a new layer on top of it, a layer that gives every single person, especially those who need it most, a real shot at harnessing that incredible power of the market and, more importantly, the magic of time.
And that brings us right back to the beginning, to that classroom puzzle. We know that starting early is everything. Investor B proved it. But for millions of Americans, our current system makes starting early an impossible dream. So the real challenge we face isn't just about tinkering with the numbers. It's about rethinking the whole system, from the ground up, to make sure that every single worker, starting with their very first paycheck, can get that clock started on compounding their own secure future. The real question is, how do we find the will to finally make it happen?